Okay, this is an overview of a phishing attack we got just a few days ago, I believe 2 days ago, and it's a pretty big phishing actor. So we're going to go through the phish and the malware associated with it. Spoiler alert, TLDR, it is Qbot. So I'll have spoilers along the way that kind of talk about that as we triage it. So first things first, Nick, you reported this up through the report phishing button in Google Workspace. This sends it to our alert center, which then sends it to our Jira queue. If we click this link, it takes us into the alert center view. This is a pretty useful view as you actually have a lot of the message details like message ID, attachment hashes. This is pretty helpful. So we know there was an attachment. However, if we go into the actual investigate alert item, this launches the investigation console and it launches a search very specific around our message. So we can see all of the logs associated with this specific phish. We can see her receiving it, she opened it, and then she did the report phishing button or the spam classification, which sends it to us. We also see who it comes from, which is not accurate, as we can see who it is really coming from. And if we click the message ID, we can begin to investigate this. This will let us see the actual makeup of the email, and we can see the reply to style of phishing that's going on here, where the malware must have gotten access to somebody's inbox. At this point, it was Melissa, but this was her old, it's pretending to be her, but it is clearly not her. And we can also see some other stuff too. Like some of this is pretty interesting, like the host name, hostwpaccelerated.com that they're sending from. So that's fairly interesting. Sometimes these extra X headers will add things like somebody's IP address or information like that. But this reply to phishing is pretty dangerous. Again, if we go to the message, we can see that there's an attachment and we have the SHA. Originally, there was no virus total report for this stuff, although as you'll see, I've uploaded a lot of this. And we can just download this item, extension.1 file. So it's a .1, which means it's probably associated with Microsoft's OneNote. And then I imagine OneNote, can it run macros? That's interesting that you need something else to run the macros, because when we go and we take the malware and we pull it down, which I have it already downloaded, we can run strings on the malware. And we will see that it contains some PowerShell. This is very typical for Qbot. They typically use a lot of PowerShell and CMD in their exploitation, and they'll use all different kinds of initial staging files. The last ones we saw were actually virtual hard disk images, and before that, we saw ISOs, which were like CD images. So this is a OneNote file, and it has this PowerShell with base64 encoded commands and other Qbot TTP. And then it writes these to a local text file called im.cmd, and then it starts that im.cmd batch program. All right, so we can grab this base64, we can base64 it, or dbase64 it. Base64 -d, this is the commands that will execute. We see they call PowerShell again. And also what's interesting to note here is that we would have a very interesting process command line tree, right? We would have OneNote writing a file and then running start or CMD. And then we would have CMD running PowerShell, which would then start a web request, which would then launch run DLL32. So that process tree would look very fucky, basically. Like you would see a lot of calls that
one of the like figures here.
Yo, what up, guys?
Hey man, just enjoying the show.
Yeah.
Talking about process ancestry here.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was hinting at. Is like the process answer sheet for this would look very fucky. Like it would look like you should never see OneNote calling you know, CMD, right? And then that would call PowerShell, and then that would call run DLL32 and web requests. It would be very messed up. So we see we have a URL, and then this writes to an output file, and then we use run DLL32 to start this with the function wind. This indicates that it's a DLL. And then if you were to download this and actually wget this, to grab it, you need the user agent for PowerShell. So if you were to do that, wget it with the PowerShell user agent, which I think I have in here. Yeah. So originally, you can even see I was just using a Windows user agent. I wasn't using the PowerShell user agent, and it wouldn't even give it to me with just the Windows user agent. So that's kind of neat. So very, very much PowerShell specific. You need that, and then that will get you the file. And then the actual file you download is a DLL. I renamed it to this malware's DLL. Normally, you don't really want to do that. You want to retain original file names. I'm just catching up. Okay. And so we have this malwares.dll. Now we can use a disassembler R2 to take a look at this. Very powerful command line disassembler. Uh, it's awesome. I love the flavor text. But if you've never used it before, like the question marks will show you the menu, and then there's all of these like larger menus or sub menus, and then you can use question marks within those to show you sub command command. So like we have analysis, and I can get more analysis commands, and then we can see that like AA is analyze all. So we'll just run that really quick. And then I is like to view things, to show stuff. And if we do, I believe IA, it's show all info. So this will just dump a bunch of info for us. Um, so right off the bat, we can see a lot of stuff. Like this is a DLL or a PE, which is a portable executable in Windows. Um, Basically PEs, all binary files are kind of designed this way, but when this gets read by the operating system will go to load it into memory. It's going to read the header file, which will tell it about things like its various sections. Um, there's a bunch of different sections to a binary. Like there's your .data, which contains all of your variables and things that you would write in your code, where you would have different like stuff you would store. There's R data, which is like your read-only data. That's a lot of like hard-coded strings or text or error strings. Um, I forget the exact name of this section, but you also have an import section, like an iData section. And this shows you all of the libraries that your program has dynamically linked and functions that it's bringing in from basically the operating system. So here we can see it uses a bunch of kernel 32 DLL functions. Like basically Windows API functions are going to be in this stuff. And then you also have your exports. These are all of the functions, because this is a DLL, that this shared library is exporting for other binaries to use or call from the DLL. So you basically have all these functions that it exports. Like these are things that you would have in a normal like function in Python or something that it just does. And very specifically, when we look back here, we can see that it was calling the wind function. So it has like a bunch of bullshit functions up top, like, and Louis looked these up the other day. These are Perl regex functions that it's compiled into it. So it's like using a bunch of Perl for all of these. And then you get down to this final function, wind, and that's kind of what we're really interested in. Um, and you can also see based on the start and end, this is a very large function. Like there's a lot going on in here. Or that just might be some kind of like offset, actually, I think. Oh, virtual address. That's the address when it gets loaded into memory. I thought it was a start and end to the function. Um, so yeah, you have all of these functions, all of this stuff, and when the binary gets loaded into memory, it's basically going to parse the header and then start to load all of this different stuff into memory. Um, so the big question becomes, well, like, what does the wind function do? And we could statically look at that, although that will take a lot of time, and we don't really have the best tools for that. What is it? Seek. I'm like at the wrong address. I just went to the wrong place. Entry point. Okay, I think this is just the entry point. Anyway, the nice thing about Radare 2 is if you find the functions that you're interested in, it has this really nice CLI based call graph. So it's like fairly easy to like walk through things, and you can also use it like a debugger. It can also patch files. So if like we wanted to like basically because this is Qbot, it's going to have a shit ton of stuff that are basically like malware analysis traps. Very often these will be like literal debug symbols, so that if you're trying to debug it, it'll create like an anti-debugging trap. Um, just for it to catch other like it's basically a conditional line of code that says like if I'm being debugged, do something different. So you'd have to go through and like patch a lot of that stuff out if you were to actually do static analysis. If you're interested in that, I have like a short write-up on how to use Radare 2 and like patch binaries with it. That talks about all of this, like jumping and replacing bytes with different commands. But long story short, we're not actually going to do static analysis. We're going to do dynamic analysis. We're going to throw it in a sandbox. This is hybrid analysis. I'm using this stuff because I have limited resources, but typically if we were doing like at a consulting shop or something, you would probably have this stuff internally available, or you'd have some kind of sandboxing tool, or maybe like reversing labs, or like some kind of better analysis tools, but we don't quite have the budget for that because we don't see this that often. So I'm using public stuff. The downside to using public stuff is all these reports are public. So like a very advanced attacker could watch these reports and then would know that we're analyzing their malware and would start to change their TTPs. I don't think that matters so much because Qbot changes their TTPs every day anyway. So let them know. So we threw it up here. This is our first DLL. It says it's 100% malicious. I don't know if it actually tells us what it is. It says it spawns a lot of processes. Now, if you look at this, if you know about Windows, this is bad. Warfault.exe, this is basically a program crashed on Windows, and this is the Windows reporting tool to like report to Microsoft that a program has crashed. So what this tells me, now it could be the malware doing this, like a lot of, and this malware does this specifically, but it will literally crash stuff and inject into Warfault and then like live inside of the crash reporting. But when you have this much stuff crashing, especially with a DLL where we're calling functions, to me, it says we're not calling the functions right, which extremely probable. Like we're literally like just automatedly trying to call all of these functions. And on top of that, it's built such that these functions have traps in them, or if a sandbox calls them, it will crash. And then we can also see that like some of the sections, like this TLS section, has like super high entropy, which to me would say it's probably encrypted with some of that stage 2 data. So the whole point of this first DLL, this first stage 1, is to not be detected, to have a lot of traps, to catch people analyzing it, and then to unencrypt more stage 2s and drop this further malware. And then it just does a lot of different things. Like it'll hook API calls to NTL DLL, etc. And then so we can actually see like how does the sandbox try to analyze this? Like what does it do? And if we go down there, we can see I added command line options to try and run the wind function after the original function, but that's not how a run DLL32 works. It will not run multiple functions like this. So it's really just running the first thing. And we can see what it's doing is it's just doing the numeral like offsets for each of the exports and then going down the list and being like run all these functions. And it never makes it. It makes it to like 17, and this is like wind is like function 30 something. So we can actually see the exact number here. Wind is, yeah, function 55. So it never makes it. But we get a lot of cool strings. We get a lot of cool details out of this. But what this tells me is that our sandbox here doesn't work. Like the malware is literally more advanced than this sandbox. And we very specifically want to sandbox a specific function wind, which it is not running. We can also throw it in VT. Again, very advanced malware, not a lot of stuff detects it. We have like some basic stuff. This guy's calling it a generic crypter, which is cool. Like our stage one isn't even getting thrown as Qbot. Oh, I guess here these guys have a rule that matches Quackbot. Um, and then just something always cool to do in VirusTotal is like look at the graph. Oh wow, okay, okay. So we actually have like neat graph stuff here. This is funny because these contacted domains, like I almost guarantee Watson, yeah, this is the literal error reporting. So that's kind of funny. Like that shouldn't be connected to the malware really. And then that's Watson, that's not good. Like that's not stuff that we care about. This is all false positives. And then again, contacting Microsoft. This is like a dynamic address. It's like a broadcast address, and so is this. So all of this is garbage, hot garbage. Okay, so we can take it to the next sandbox that we have. Um, this one's really cool. So like any run, again, public sandbox. We shouldn't be using this if we have the right tools. But any run's really sick because it's an interactive sandbox. So you get to upload the malware, and then I can call it very specifically, like just our wind function, and we can see exactly what the wind function does when we call it. So run DLL32, like that's just that process, but it kicks off a bunch of other processes. Like one of the things it does is it launches Internet Explorer and then it'll run within this. And it does the same with this Windows Media Player config thing. It'll process inject itself into these like sort of benign processes. And then again, this is just the stage one. So it's like kind of hiding, it's dropping other copies of itself, and it's checking various aspects of the machine to say, like, should I continue to run? Some of the copies it drops of itself are pretty cool. Like it's dropping some in app local temp, but it's also modifying all of these registry keys for what I assume it is storing a backup of itself across all of these different registry keys. Um, and it also will modify not run DLL32, but NTDL DLL30 the NTL DLL1. It modifies that so that every time that's called in the future, it will also run a copy of this in the background, which that
Yeah,
gets called everywhere.
yeah. Just a comment on that. That library, pretty much every application in Windows is going to use that, so it allows Qbot to, basically have visibility to every single one of the running processes.
Yeah, and that type of persistence is super tricky. Like normally when like Lexi, when we do host triage in Falcon, the one thing that we're always looking for are those auto start execution points, which is like auto run keys, the auto start directory. What like Louis just described, it's modifying a library that gets called by everything else. Nothing's going to detect that. Like unless we detect the library being different, it's going to avoid all of those auto start execution points and just get called all the time anyway. So it's very, very tricky persistence and hard to detect. We basically have to scan all of the DLLs on our machines and make sure their hashes match like what they're supposed to be. Um, so one interesting thing about this is that at one point it does drop a stage two, but it's like some kind of empty stage two. I forget exactly where it happens, but at one point it does drop a file and it's like an empty stage two. Um, all this to say, basically any runs doesn't do it. Like it detects any run sandbox and it doesn't fully finish executing. It drops like its empty stage two. And then same with the hybrid analysis. This never really does the trick. It only detects like it being an encrypted stage one. Where we finally get there is Joe Sandbox. Joe Sandbox is like it's like a reverse engineer sandbox. They also bought this other company called Reversing Labs. They have a free version. I would love the paid version of this, but they also do the interactive thing. So I like went in here and ran this by hand to get the right function, which is very nice. And they do a lot of really cool stuff too. Like you can route all of the traffic through Tor. For this one specifically, I did a thing called FakeNet where it has like a fake network, and then it simulates all of the network calls. So if the malware reaches out to a domain, we give it like a 200 OK and we let it like continue to explore. Like we'll resolve the domain to a local IP, and then it stands up a fake web server and responds. So what's super cool about this is Qbot, like once we got it in here, it was able to detect that it's Qbot with Yara signatures. And the actual Qbot malware is very well understood. So the way some of the best malware analysis with this stuff works via memory analysis. Yes. Yeah, and everybody can explore this. This is really rich. This is good analysis. Linking this in chat. So the way it works is like it'll load a lot of the stuff into memory, and then it does memory analysis. Like those Yara rules, they're not on the file, they're on the memory analysis. And one of the things that they can do with Qbot is they can actually extract the full bot campaign settings out of memory. So here's all
Hey,
of
Dad,
yeah.
what's Yara?
Oh, Yara is a really cool tool. So in security, we are always looking for patterns or things we want to detect. Yara is literally just a text matching tool. You basically write these types of rules where you say like, this could be anything. This here is specifically bytes, but it could be strings. And then you can run this on anything. In the most common context, it's like files, like you'll run this on PEs and you're looking for specific byte patterns, but you could run it on memory dumps. We could run this on emails. We could have a whole system set up where we run like Yara rules on attachments or email bodies. So it's really powerful because it lets you match anything against anything in like a very like a parallel processing way with configuration files. Like it's very well done. And it has tons of integrations. Like it's like a security kind of match all tool. Very useful. Good call out. Uh, so we're able to extract the memory config, and here's all the C2. I didn't block all of this. I just like blocked the stage one URL. But ideally, if like we actually had these infections, we would be blocking all of this to like kind of neuter the malware. If you're looking at the report, it also has this MITRE table, which shows a lot of the techniques that it will do. And you can actually like see some of those exact techniques, like what is it doing? So here it's not only renaming it, but it's modifying NTDLL. Um, and here it modifies some jumps in this. So it's very nasty. Like it's going to hook all these libraries. We even have a cool call graph. This is pretty sweet. And this is what I meant earlier about like if you were to actually see this, oh shit, I just jumped all around. But if you were to actually see this call graph, it would be very, very suspicious. Like I bet Falcon might even detect the call graph calls because they'd be so anomalous. Anyway, I dropped that link. You guys should definitely look through it. But all of that is to say, like, this malware here, Qbot, is going to look strange because it doesn't actually do anything specific. Even Qbot, the stage 2 of Qbot, is all designed to give somebody else access. It's an access broker malware. So the whole point of the stage 1 and stage 2 is to avoid detection and then like basically sell that access and piggyback somebody else in there. So it might do like some kind of system collection or like information gathering, but really what they're going to do is they're going to then sell that access to somebody who will come in with Cobalt Strike and own the entire domain and do something like that, or they'll just sell the access to ransomware providers who will ransom the access. You can also look up like more TTPs with Quackbot. This is like the full list from MITRE, and it'll link to other reports that people have written about like Quackbot. But I think this CISA like report on them is actually really good. Um, and this goes more into like what they do operationally. So uh basically, yeah, they go to like check different stuff. We can see it injects itself into Internet Explorer. A lot of the same stuff that we saw establishes persistence. It didn't leverage the run keys, but it did like spray itself across reg keys. We can also see here, like very much exactly our TTPs, the PowerShell embedded stuff. Again, a lot of the same stuff starts with the malicious email. They even do the email hijacking, I think it's called in here. Yeah, email originates outside of the organization. Where is it? Yeah, Qbot Trojan hijacking email threads to carry out phishing campaigns. So I think this one is just good for like the actual TTPs that we're seeing, despite being like government-y and CISA. But yeah, that's it. Like the real deal, some nasty malware. Any questions? Or you guys want to run it or something? Anybody still here?
Yeah, still here. One question here.
Yeah.
Since like we got the second stage, the proper second stage out of Joe's sandbox.
Mhm.
Um, we had like a list of I think C2 IPs, right?
Yes.
Did we ever look at if we saw those anywhere in our infrastructure, or like if we had like host names associated with any of those?
Yeah, I didn't look at like each of these C2s, but I did look for the original stage one
Gotcha.
C2, this
That makes
guy.
sense.
And we had no hits for this other than I believe you and I at the time. And then I blocked this. So hopefully nobody can even like start the process.
Yeah, I was just curious if like we had, one of those latent infections that are calling out to one of those things.
Yeah, and my these are probably different for every build too.
That's a good point. Yeah. IPs are a dime a dozen.
Exactly. And this is probably just like, probably other parts of their botnet.
Yep.
Cool. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Thank you. I actually haven't like used Joe Sand